Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're untangling a fascinating and honestly kind of terrifying reality: why the global inflation problem might not actually be over. Over the past year, we've all seen the headlines celebrating a soft landing. Central bankers have practically been taking victory laps. But beneath that calm surface, there's an entirely unseen force gathering momentum. And it's a force with the absolute power to make everything more expensive all over again. So to really understand the hidden mechanics at play here, we've got to look way past the standard economic data points. Let's dive in.
So picture this. Imagine waking up 6 months from now and noticing something incredibly frustrating. You go to fill up your car and gas prices are climbing. You check out at the supermarket and suddenly your grocery bill is up another 8 to 10%. Your routine online deliveries, they've got new surcharges tacked on. And airline tickets for your next trip have just skyrocketed. It feels like we literally just dragged ourselves out of this exact macroeconomic nightmare, right? So, how in the world did we get back here so quickly?
Well, the answer boils down to a single, highly volatile commodity: oil. Right now, most people, and honestly even a lot of seasoned financial analysts, are looking at leveling charts and thinking, okay, inflation is finally contained, we weathered the storm. But oil operates on a completely different frequency. While the broader consumer price index might look like it's chilling out, oil is the unseen catalyst. It has the sheer kinetic power to restart the entire inflation cycle right from scratch.
Now here's where most of us get it completely wrong. We tend to think oil prices only really matter when we're physically standing at the gas pump. You see the numbers ticking up on the dial, you feel that immediate pinch in your wallet, and you just assume, well, that's the full extent of the damage. But that localized pain? That is just the tip of the iceberg. It completely blinds us to the much deeper systemic ways this one commodity dictates global pricing.
Think of oil as the invisible engine of the global economy. Those massive cargo ships crossing the Pacific, the overnight transport planes making sure you get your next day delivery, the diesel trucks rolling down the highway. They are literally the blood vessels of global trade, and they all pump oil. Every single node in our modern supply chain, from digging up raw materials to that final delivery van pulling into your driveway, relies intensely on energy.
And let's push this even deeper because we have to consider manufacturing overhead. Oil isn't just something we burn for fuel. Petroleum is a foundational ingredient in plastics, industrial fertilizers, synthetic fabrics, even the asphalt on our roads. So when oil gets expensive, absolutely everything gets expensive. It's woven directly into the molecular fabric of the products we use every day. A surge in energy costs isn't some isolated event. It cascades through local construction, global agriculture, and commercial manufacturing like a shockwave.
Let's put this into perspective and visualize the math for a second. Imagine the price of a single barrel of crude oil jumping from, say, $70 to $100. On the surface, sure, that's just a fluctuating number on a trading terminal in New York or London. But in reality, that simple $30 jump is the spark that ignites a massive global economic chain reaction.
It triggers a ruthless domino effect. First, increased fuel costs immediately squeeze shipping margins. That forces businesses everywhere to pay a steep premium just to keep the lights on and their basic operations running. And guess what? Nobody absorbs those losses willingly. To survive, companies protect their profit margins by passing those surging costs directly onto the final domino in the line, you, right at the checkout counter.
But you know what the most dangerous part of this whole cycle is? It's completely invisible until it's far too late. By the time everyday people spot the problem printed on a store receipt or notice a subtle price hike on their favorite streaming subscription, the damage upstream is already done. The dominoes fell months ago in logistics hubs and manufacturing plants, and they've just been slowly, silently working their way down to the retail level.
Which brings us to a really critical question. If markets have been relatively stable lately, what exactly is happening behind the scenes right now that could trigger a sudden price shock? Like, why would energy markets suddenly start flashing warning signs after we've had this period of relative calm?
Well, when we look closely at the data and the current global indicators, the warning signs basically fall into three distinct buckets: geopolitical conflict, supply problems, and strong demand. And these aren't just abstract textbook concepts. These are active, real-time pressures compounding on top of one another. And any single one of them has the leverage to completely upend global pricing. Let's break these down, starting with geopolitical conflict. We're looking way beyond just generic regional instability here. We're talking about active tensions near critical global choke points or strict international sanctions that are literally reshaping energy alliances overnight. Our global markets are so hyper-connected that a single drone strike or a blocked trade route thousands of miles away can instantly bottleneck supply and spike prices right in your hometown.
Then you've got the harsh math of supply constraints.
When major oil-producing nations decide to strategically throttle their output to protect their own margins, or when aging infrastructure suddenly fails, the global pool of available oil shrinks. And because the world's reliance on energy represents what economists call inelastic demand, meaning we need it regardless of how much it costs, a shrinking supply against steady consumption makes a price surge mathematically inevitable.
Ironically, though, the third catalyst is actually a byproduct of success, a booming economy, expanding businesses, a surge in global travel. All of that demands massive amounts of baseline energy. As developing nations industrialize and consumer spending ramps up, energy consumption just goes through the roof, which means that widespread economic growth itself actually becomes a powerful, self-sustaining, inflationary engine.
Now think back over the last few years to that brutal fight against runaway prices. Remember, central banks aggressively hiked interest rates to near historic highs. Everyday consumers dramatically slashed their spending. Corporations deliberately froze their hiring. It was this painful, drawn-out process explicitly designed to wring excess cash out of the system and artificially cool the economy down.
But here is the unique, frankly chilling danger of oil. Because energy is the ultimate prerequisite for all commercial activity, a sudden energy shock can essentially erase years of that hard economic sacrifice in a matter of months. Even if interest rates stay high, a supply-side oil shock bypasses those monetary policies entirely. It reignites inflation from an angle that central banks simply cannot control.
And we really can't ignore the deeply psychological aspect of this either. Inflation isn't just a clinical data point on a chart. It leaves profound emotional scars. Consumers vividly remember the severe anxiety and the very real financial stress of paying for historically expensive gas and groceries. Because of that recent trauma, the public is hypervigilant. We are ready to react drastically at the very first sign of rising costs.
And that creates a dangerous, self-fulfilling spiral. The moment prices at the pump start climbing, consumer confidence shatters almost overnight. People and businesses immediately hoard their cash, they delay major purchases, and they cancel expansion plans. Suddenly, the broader economy grinds to a halt, driven not just by the underlying math, but entirely by widespread caution and fear.
But hold on, because here is where the narrative completely flips. What most people misunderstand about macroeconomic energy shocks is that they don't actually penalize everyone equally. While the general public and most standard businesses are suffering through the resulting inflation spiral, there's a completely different side to this equation that absolutely thrives under these exact conditions. We're essentially looking at a massive, rapid transfer of wealth. On one side, energy producers, extraction companies, and commodity investors watch their profit margins skyrocket when the price per barrel goes up. On the other side, everyday consumers, international airlines, and vast logistics networks are completely crushed under the weight of the new overhead. It's a zero-sum game where the foundational costs of living become a direct source of immense corporate profit. And we have history's warning staring us right in the face. Look, nobody can predict the future with absolute certainty, but the data is unforgiving. Just look back at the massive energy shocks of the 1970s, or those devastating crude oil spikes right before the 2008 financial crisis. History proves, time and time again, that when energy costs severely detach from the baseline, the cost of absolutely everything else follows right behind it. Which brings us to the core realization of this entire explainer. The real story here isn't actually about oil itself. It's about the extreme underlying fragility of our modern economies. Our global system is so intensely optimized, so deeply hyperconnected, that a single disruption to one foundational commodity can instantly trigger a cascade that alters prices worldwide.
So where does inflation actually begin? It sure doesn't start on the supermarket shelves. It begins deep within petrochemical plants, across vast oceanic shipping lanes, and inside complex logistics hubs. It starts in all the unseen places most consumers never give a second thought to. The next wave of global inflation may already be forming, right now, in these industrial networks, silently compounding long before it ever hits your grocery bill.
Ultimately, the question isn't whether oil matters. We know for sure it does. The real question is, how much more will everything cost before people finally notice the dominoes might already be falling in the supply chain right now? So, how vulnerable are you when they finally reach you? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes on the data, and I'll catch you in the next one.